So my name's Neil O'Hare. Thanks. I'd really like to thank IPOSI for inviting me to this citizens jury around health records, a really important subject. Next slide, please, Jen. So what is health information? I suppose it's any personal information about your health, your disability. It's anything that relates to, let's say, an injury, your current status, maybe a particular illness that you've had over many, many years. It might be the results of tests that you've had, but it also can be very positive sort of health information. And we traditionally we used to think of health information very much as what sits in in a hospital chart or in your GP practice, but now it's much broader than that, and it stems right from when we're born right the way through our life to when we pass away. Next slide, please, Jen. So, as I said, traditionally we think of medical records as being hard copy medical records. Next slide. And these hard copy records, they have lots of, they've been used for many, many years, hundreds of years, and they contain very pertinent information. The problem is they degrade over time and we lose pieces of information out of it. Next slide, please. And information that should really end up in the chart and should have that totality of your picture in terms of your data doesn't always sit there, doesn't always find its way into the chart, and we can often lose pieces of information through no fault really of anyone. It just happens over time, and as I said, these charts can degrade over time. So we have issues like data quality and completeness. Next slide, please. So one of the solutions, and part of what I presume why we're here discussing today, is to try and move towards electronic patient records. And they would seem to be the nirvana, but they also offer other issues that we need to be very, very mindful of, but they have huge benefits really as well. Next slide, please. So when we're thinking about electronic patient information, electronic healthcare information, there's probably two definitions. Electronic patient records tend to be within an environment, but healthcare records are everything that we get from when we're, right the way through our lifetime, a much more longitudinal record. So it might be what information we have in your GP or your EHR, but it's also used in terms of how we schedule maybe your outpatient clinics, or data that we might use for research, or more commonly today in using AI, and I'll come back to that later on, how we're using AI to try and help us in your diagnosis, help us in the care of patients. Next slide, please. So when we get all this information, and it comes from many, many quarters, who do we share that data with? Well, there's a large range of kind of groupings, people, organizations that we would share data with in different formats. So obviously your GP, your own care team need to see it. The HSE probably need to see us, and the Department of Health need to see a certain amount, but probably not your specific information. You might be involved in clinical trials. You might be part of some sort of state claims agency, or an incident that's happened. So we would have to share data with other national bodies in the place. But all the time we're trying to make sure that we share the minimum amount of data, and we're really trying to protect the data on your behalf in as much as we can. Next slide, please. But we have challenges, and what I want to do really is talk about some of the challenges that we kind of come across. The image on the right hand side is kind of, we're all used to seeing this, unfortunately, where we see medical notes ending up in the incorrect places, in housing estates, on skips, all that sort of thing. But we're also seeing issues around computer viruses, and can they potentially alter the data that relates to you, and that could be very dangerous in terms of altering your diagnosis maybe, or altering your condition. But it's never usually just one image or one test. There's a whole range of things that go to make up your particular diagnosis. Next slide, please, Jen. We have apps. We're all using mobile apps, and some of these apps are really good, and they capture lots of information. They allow you to communicate with your doctor at a remote location. Next slide, please. But they're also, really bad apps out there, and we need to be very mindful of what are the good ones and what are the bad ones. And we've had lots of examples of ones that just do a really poor job and can kind of give a false sense of positivity or negativity in either case. So we just need to be really careful about that. Next slide, please. So as I said, we're looking at this whole range of data, health data, and it used to be a very contained thing, but now we're really interested in the wellness of people, and we're interested in using health data to try and make sure that they're that people are well, and that they're managed through their health, and that we don't always have to bring them into the hospital or bring them into a clinic to treat people, that we can treat you much more remotely in your home, where most people want to be, that we can kind of break down the walls, break down the barriers of healthcare. Next slide, please. So GDPR is there. I'm not going to talk too much about it. I think Kathy's probably going to talk more about it, but it's always in the background, and it's always kind of guiding a lot of what we do, but it can cause some problems. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we want to try and do is try to bridge that gap between the health system and you as a patient, and one way around doing that is things like patient portal. Next slide, please. And in the patient portal, we need to be really careful about who can see things, but you can build in certain capabilities inside those solutions, that kind of privacy by design. So you can make sure that it's kind of secure within it. You can make sure you can build in who can see your data. You can control that, and that's the way it should be. And also, whoever's looked at that data can be logged, and we can give you access to see who's actually looked at your data, because it is your data. Next slide, please. So what's happening in Ireland in terms of e-health? Well, there's lots of big projects going on. There's lots of initiatives. We're way behind kind of international norms in this regard, but we are catching up. We're starting to really invest heavily, and you would have seen that and heard reference to that over the COVID. So we have various systems. Next slide, please. And one of them I just wanted to make reference to, because it poses a particular case in point, is around the medical imaging system, a thing called NIMS. It's how x-rays and radiology information is captured across the country and stored and shared around the country. So all the green dots are all the hospitals that are connected on NIMS. Next slide, please. And you can see from these numbers, it's a very big system. It has 14 million x-rays on it. It has 5.5 million patient reports. It's huge, but it's very controlled. It's very contained, and actually it's not used in the way there's probably more benefit that we could gain from this sort of data. Next slide, please. And one of the challenges would be that you have a right as a patient to request that your data is deleted, but actually it's quite hard to delete patient data and patient images from these sort of systems. It's quite hard to identify. You can identify a single patient, but how do you say, well, I'll get rid of everybody who's over 10 years old in terms of the data, because that might be really relevant data. You might be an oncology patient, and we need to keep it for the course of your life. Next slide, please. AI is really coming into play. We're really seeing huge benefits in using AI. Next slide, please. And there's lots of areas where we're seeing AI in terms of apps, predictive analysis, predicting what might happen to you, trying to get in there first, trying to improve your health, and trying to see how the data kind of interacts. Next slide, please. But to train AI algorithms, we need access to large amounts of patient data. We can't train it on fake data. It needs to be real data, and it needs to be Irish data. We can't train it on, South African data, because the South African population are different to the Irish population, and vice versa. Next slide, please. So it really is a big challenge. And the final challenge is really the extent of the data. And I just posed this one as an interesting one to leave you with. So this is our public service card. Next slide, please. And these are the 16 fields that are stored in terms of data, and you can see some of them there: your surname, your forename, your date of birth, etc. So 16 fields, and we can get quite kind of worried about that, but yet we engage with the likes of Amazon and Alibaba, and they're storing anywhere between 5,000 and 15,000 pieces of information on us as we use those systems. So there's some sort of balance, and certainly the data in Amazon is not that sensitive compared to some of that data. So there is we need to be very mindful of that. Thank you very much.